Welcome to the Joy of Diversity, where each video we paint a different color from the original 8 colors of the Pride flag. This video is green. Green's theme is nature, and with the theme nature, we're going to be focusing on connection and resilience. And resilience through connection. So, in your kit, whether you have a kit or you're using the supplies at home, this is what you'll need. You should have one watercolor tin, some sort of eraser. This is a kneadable eraser. Obviously, some watercolor paper. You should have a few pieces. Some sort of pen for liner, a pencil for drawing, 1 or 2 paintbrushes, some painter's tape. Make sure it's not masking tape, because masking tape could rip the paper. It should be painter's tape, whatever color, doesn't matter. Some sort of lid to mix your watercolor on, or if you have something like this, you'll have spaces to mix it, but mine are a little dirty right now, so I'm using a yogurt lid, and some water. So, the first step we're going to do is taping down our paper. We do this for 2 reasons mainly. One, so we have lovely crisp edges that look really cute, and then also so that the watercolor paper doesn't wrinkle as we're painting, because if we use too much water or we work in a really large space, the paper can start to warp, and the tape just prevents it from warping. It's not a cure-all. It still might warp if you use too much water, but it does help it significantly, and that way it doesn't move. So, I'm really lucky because I have this nice grid where I can use it to put my tape down, but just be careful. You want to make sure you're getting even lines and lines that aren't crooked. So as we're taping, I'm just going to explain a little bit about today's theme. So because it's nature, obviously we're going to be painting some flowers, but each of the flowers has significance to queer history and queer resilience, and we'll get a little more into that topic later, but I just wanted to start out by kind of discussing the topic a little. And now, with every single video that we're putting out here for the Joy of Diversity, it's a paint along, it's not a paint as you see. So if yours doesn't look like mine, if yours isn't even what I'm painting, that's perfectly fine. All we're doing is we're painting together. We're not necessarily painting the same thing. If you'd like to follow along step by step, please feel free. But this is mainly about being able to paint and access creativity from wherever you are, whether or not you can make it to our in-person events. We will be having tons of creative in-person events throughout the year, so make sure you're checking out on the Yellow House Instagram to see what comes next. Yeah. And just as I'm taping, I'm making sure to press down these edges to make sure that no water can leak through. And make sure, I forgot to mention this earlier, but make sure when you're taping it down, you're taping it onto something that's okay to get wet. So just make sure if you're taping it to, and something that's flat, of course. I've used plastic cutting boards, I've used plastic placemats, glass tables, but I mean, be careful that your tape doesn't leave residue. Anything flat that can get wet underneath. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend it on like a hardwood table or desk that could get warped by the water from the paint, you know. Don't want to ruin any of your furniture. Yeah. And also, I forgot to mention earlier as well, make sure if you are using a kit that you remember to return it after you're done. That way other people can enjoy the kits as well. Ooh, that doesn't look right. That looks a little better. you know, it doesn't have to be perfect. That's why we're painting, you know? If we're not painting for fun, why paint? Okay. So that's as good as it's getting right now. I know this one's not perfect, but we're gonna leave it. So our next step is our sketch. So you want to make really light sketches. You don't want to be pressing super hard on the paper, because actually a little bit later we're going to be erasing our sketch before we paint, which sounds weird, but we're not going to erase all of it. We're just going to take most of it off, so it's like really, really light. But because today's theme is nature, I have a couple sketches already. So, I mean, I wrote out the steps for how to do each thing, and I'll talk about it more in depth as we go through each flower. But this is my general idea. It really helps to have a sketch of what you want to do before you do it, especially if you're looking for something specific. So here, I mean, I'm going to change up the arrangement of the flowers a little bit, but I have my lavender coming out here, I've got my carnations, and just a general sketch. So I'm going to follow along this, and we're going to start by just using the shapes. Okay, so we want to start by drawing general shapes and lines to sketch out where everything is going to go. And remember, like I said before, we want to use the lightest of sketches, because if we press down really hard when we do the painting next, it might, the lead might show through the painting. So, let's start by drawing out my lavender. I remember we want to add motion to the painting. That way your eyes are drawn a certain way. I'm thinking I'm going to go for this. I think that looks nice. And you can always change it up later if you're not feeling it. So I'm actually going to deviate from my sketch. I didn't do it in order of color. So I'm going to do some violets here, I think. Sorry if you hear any noise. It is my air conditioner. It is hot 27 degrees in my apartment, so I was considering turning it off for the video, but it was quite needed, so apologies about that. So I've added where I'm going to put my violets, and next is the carnations. I think I'm going to do some like this. Like that. There, might be nice. And, so we've got purple, blue, green, yellow. So now it's going to be the pansies. Ooh, I kind of messed this up. I actually have to erase it and restart, but that's the thing. It's not going to be perfect. You might have to take a few tries, but that's the beauty of it. We're just doing it together, so I'm going to actually pause the video so the camera doesn't shake crazy while I erase, and I will be back in a second. So that's the really good thing about drawing lightly, is I was actually able to erase it all with little to no lines. But I'm going to go and do that again. So I'm just going to change up the placement of the lavender so I have a little more room for the other flowers, because I think that was my issue. So then the violets are going to be up here. I think I might put them to just this one side. And then carnations here. And then one sort of to the side like that. And then the pansies will be here. The yellow and orange. And then my nice red roses. So we kind of have it going up. I might make the carnations go up a little bit actually, and then this can be a pansy down here, and then more roses. And then of course leaves from the different plants. Sorry, that was my cat. Yeah, that's a thing. Nothing's set in stone. We can change things as we go. But now I'm going to talk a little more in detail about each of the flowers. So I'll start with roses. So with roses, they start as a little bulb. So you want to draw like a teardrop shape, and you basically build your petals around it. Just like we see here. And I like to just put like lines that curve around each other. And then you just build more and more petals off of it. And so with roses, when you get to the petal part, you have like this base shape, and then a lip, which is the flower curling over. So as you see, this is base, and then lip, base, and then these are just lips that come out. That's at least what I call them. I don't know the anatomical words. Anyone who's in biology could probably let me know the proper terms for what I'm talking about, but this is basically the shape we're going for. And then you can add like little lines for details. I probably won't add the little lines just yet because this is just a sketch that we're painting over top of. And then the leaves on roses are like sort of this like ovally shape, typically come in clusters of 3, but then they have these jagged edges like you can see here. Little jagged edges. But yeah. So I'm going to sketch the roses in a little more detail, and yeah, then we'll get on to our next flower. Okay, so I think I'm going to do about 2 roses. I think that's good. And the next flower, so for both yellow and orange, I'm doing pansies just because when I was researching different flowers, I couldn't really find anything for orange that connected with like queer history, so we'll just do both yellow and orange for this. And pansies are really cool because they have like a bunch of different ways they can look, but they're also kind of specific in how they are. So when we're sketching the pansies, we want to start with a little circle in the center and then 3 leaves. And this bottom leaf is always going to be on top of these 2 leaves. And sometimes they curve in and have little like folds. But basically, we're going to start with these 3 leaves, with this center one being on top. And they're just these kind of round shapes that like have a little lip like that. And then we add these two back leaves, is what I call them. I don't know what their actual names are. And it's typically one with the other folded behind. And they're always behind these top 3 leaves. Like we can see here and here. Okay, so then again, we're just gonna add a little more detail. So they have little curved edges. Their edges aren't perfectly round. Like you can see here, it's got a little bit of texture to it, so we can add that in our sketch if we'd like. And then if you want, you can change the colors. Sometimes these back 2 petals are completely different colors than these ones. I don't have a picture of it here, but sometimes with this kind of flower, these back ones will be purple, which is pretty cool. But yeah, sometimes they have this little splash of color. Sometimes they're just plain like this. And their leaves are more rounded. It's still that like ovally shape, but instead of like spiky edges, we have like round bumps, like you can see in the background here. So in the end, we're going for something like this. So I'm gonna sketch in the pansies and I will discuss later. Good there. I think 3 is enough. So we'll move on to green, which is carnations. Take a look here. So carnations are pretty similar to roses, where they kind of have this similar silhouette at least, but they're a lot more chaotic than roses, as you can see here. So they don't really have like that center point that roses have where they build all off of each other, but rather it's like a series of squiggles in this like circular shape. So you can have a lot of fun with carnations. It's really hard to go wrong, but you basically want to do squiggles that are basically like enveloping each other, if that makes sense. As you can see here, I kind of like to think of it as like the texture of like or shape of a shower loofah, or those little like tissue paper pom-pom kind of things. But you can have a lot of fun with the shapes of your carnations. And then I'm gonna put one that's like on its side. When you have that, they have these little petals that come around, like just rounder petals that fold a little bit, and then these tiny little, or petals, leaves, and these tiny little thin leaves. So you can see it here kind of, where they have like general leaf shape that is the base of it, and then these tiny ones here. And then on the stem too, it has these, again, thin, almost spiky leaves. So then we're looking for something around this. Okay, so I'm gonna sketch in my carnations, and then we will meet back for violets. forgot to mention, so on the edge of carnation leaves, they're actually quite spiky and like raw edges. So again, definitely don't have to be perfect with anything when you sketch in your carnations. Okay, so I think that's good for carnations. Next is violets, which in this case are going to be representing blue, which I know violets are purple, but there are blue violets, so we're gonna go with blue, a bluey purple for these ones. So with violets, they have 5 leaves, similar to pansies, where you've got the 1, 2, 3, but then it forms more of a star shape, like an upside down star, as you can see here. And they all kind of curve out like that from this one center point. So we're gonna draw like ovally shapes with some rounded ends, just like this. And then they're typically like hanging over from the photos I saw. So I have mine like that, but you don't have to show the stem. And then they have this like center bit where the pollen is that's a little triangular and kind of has like a little ridge in the center. But we don't have to get that big into detail. And then sometimes they have like these wild veins and stuff like that. I don't know if they're not actual veins, obviously, but like you can see the little detail there. And then sometimes they're just plain, which is like regular leaves. And then they have like these interesting centers. I don't know if we'll be able to get that much detail. I don't know if I'll be able to get that much detail, but we're gonna try and emulate these ones. So in the end, we have something like this. And again, they have like, it's a little mix between the rose and the pansy leaves, where it's like smaller bumps, but they're still a bit rounder than the rose's leaves. Yeah. So I'm just gonna sketch in our violets. I think that's good enough. We don't need too much detail for this base sketch. It's really, we want to focus on getting the shapes correct, and then we just want to know where we want to lay our color. We don't need super detail because that's what we're going to add with the paint. Lastly, we have lavender. And lavender is really cool, but it's kind of tricky to draw. So it's actually like a bunch of little flowers on a stem, as you can see here. These are all like little unfurled, so they haven't yet bloomed. You can see this one is one of the bloomed ones where it comes out there. But basically, we want to start by making our line and then adding small little petal shapes. And we want to make sure that they're going up like this. See this one? It's not like a flower. It's the petals, and they're going up in this round shape. So we want them in this almost like a rounded triangle, like that. That's the motion we're going for. You see how on this one it's like that? I mean, this one does have some going down because it's a bit different, but like this one, if you look at this one, all of them kind of go up. And that's what we want to focus on. And so each one is this, like, each little nodule of lavender is this little unfurled, or furled? Each one is this little furled bit, I don't know what else to call them, that turns into a blossom flower. So we're like, it's like a tightly coiled, like a rose before it's opened kind of thing. So we're gonna make that, and then they have, you know, like 5 or 6 things that go down. So I'm gonna sketch in our lavender and then meet back again. And each one gets bigger as you go down, depending on the type of lavender. I'm not going for any specific species or anything like that. I don't know enough about flowers to do that. But this is the kind that I typically draw when I do paintings like this. Then our second one kind of got lost, so I'm going to draw it again here. Now there's a lot going on here. You definitely don't have to make yours as crowded as mine is. This one might be a little challenge for me. We'll see. But you just want to make sure you use your space. So just to show a close-up of the sketch, we have our carnations here, our pansies, our violet, the lavender, and the roses. And so you can go with any sort of composition that suits you, but this is what we're going to go with. Feel free to pause or take a picture or anything like that if you'd like to sketch from this directly. Okay, so once we've got our sketch down, what we want to do is erase any lines that we don't need, because the less graphite that's on the paper, the better, because it makes our watercolor easier. And so once we've erased all those little bits, like I'm doing here, what we'll do is we'll go on the page. And if you've got a kneaded eraser, this is much easier. So I'll show you with the kneaded eraser, but you can do it with a regular eraser as well. So you'll notice it's like plastic, like plasticine. And so you're able to knead it, but what's really cool about it is you're able to kind of roll it into this little log, which this is how I like to erase with it. And I just roll it up. And you see how much lighter that got? So you're just gonna roll it up with pressure. And so we're not erasing our lines completely, but now they're less visible and there's less graphite on the paper. So it's really only what's needed so that we can see on the paper. That way we can still paint it. I think these carnations will take a little bit extra rolling. And you know, it's fun. It's fun to play with. So if you have a regular eraser, how you're going to do that is, let's pretend this is my regular eraser. You take it and you just lightly go across like this. You might see some streaks in it, that's okay, but that's how you'll do it if you have a regular eraser. Okay, I think this is almost light enough. I'm just going to erase in a little more detail, which might make the camera jiggle, so I might pause if it gets too wiggly. And once I'm done, I'll come back. Okay, and if you erase too much, which I kind of did here because you can't really see that, you can always just sketch again very lightly so I'll just tap with the eraser. Okay. Nearly done now. And again, if this is taking you longer than it's taking me, don't worry. Take your time. I've done this plenty, so I'm pretty quick at it now. So if it takes you a little longer, that is no worry at all. It's nice because with the kneading erasers, you can get it to a fine point that you can use to erase very specifically, which is nice. Okay, I think that's enough erasing for me. Now we get into the fun part, which is painting.
This is where the fun starts.
So, in your paint palette, which is hopefully cleaner than mine, this one has seen better days. I've had it for a couple years now. It's water activated paint, so what you want to do to get started is to add a few drops of water to each of the things you plan to use. I think I'll start with my purple colors. So I'm just going to add a little bit of water into my purple and into my green, or blue, not green. Oh well, do a little in green. But just to get them so that they actually come up with color. You can let it sit for a few seconds. I'm kind of impatient, so I normally start painting right away. But we'll have it here. Then I really don't use a paint lid, but I did not have time to clean out my whole thing. So what you can do is take some and just put it in your palette. And it's nice because then you can make in between shades and nicer colors. Make sure to rinse in between your colors. And the good thing about watercolor palettes is if you do have a messy palette like myself, and you're worried about colors getting into each other, especially in like yellow or lighter colors, you can just wipe it with a baby wipe, a piece of damp paper towel, anything like that will work. I'm just gonna take a little bit of green too, which will be nice. Okay, and make sure to change out your water regularly if it's getting super dirty, like mine is here, but because it's all colors that are okay to go on here, I'm just gonna start with it. So I recommend diluting your paint more than you think you need just to start, because you want to start with lighter colors and then deepening as you go. Some people do the opposite, where they put down like really dark shadows first and then they add the lighter colors on top. I started with acrylic paint, so I still have that mindset of you do lighter colors first and then the darker and blend into it. At least that's just how I learned how to paint, but you're welcome to do it however you like. We're just adding just a wash of color to get our base for each of the things before we add any detailing. And if you find there's too much, what you can do is you take some of the paint off of here and you get a dry paintbrush. You can actually pick the color back up. See? Just lightly tapping it. Bam. taken away the color. You can do the same thing with a tissue or anything like that, especially if you make a mistake or it's too dark. You can always dab it with a tissue or anything like that. This is a nice lavender color to start, and I'll just keep filling this out. Okay, now that you've got your base colors done, you want to start adding detail with darker and darker colors. Make sure to be careful when you're doing it because with the darker colors, they are less forgiving. But yeah, you just want to add your detail like that. And then once you have detail, I like to add in darker shades like that, and then take a clean but damp brush, and then just kind of blend it between the dark and the light, like so. And then it gives it a more 3D feeling, and you have less harsh shading. Just like that. Ta-da! So I'm going to continue on with this. I'm going to do the same for all of them. If you make a mistake and you need to lighten up an area or anything like that, see how I did this a little dark? You just put clean water on it and scrub a little with your brush. And then take a clean part of your tissue, press down, and there. It's nice and lighter so you can fix your shading up.
One of the great things about queer communities and histories is the common thread of connection and resilience, and connection through resilience. Each flower we're going to talk about today has their own story of significance within the queer community, and we're going to explore all of them. Our first flower is lavender, representing violet or purple, which is kind of ironic because we're also painting violets. I know, but hey. There's only so many blue-colored flowers. But violet has an interesting path throughout queer history. Originally, lavender has been cultivated for its use of distilling into oils, and is commonly seen as representing relaxation, given its sleeping properties. But with its connection to queer community, I first heard about lavender's significance within the queer community through Elsa Gidlow's memoir, I Come With My Songs. Elsa Gidlow was co-founder of the first queer publication in Canada, producing Les Mouches Fantastiques in Montreal in 1918. It was spread across North America using discreet transportation and helped cultivate a secret community of queer Canadians. Pretty cool. Groups like that have existed for years, though. Secret societies, groups, friendships existed long before we even had the word for homosexuality, let alone queerness, which popped up in the 70s. These groups were sustained and protected by subtle codes used to identify one's membership, much like the Victorian flower language, which might be a little more popular, in which different flowers and colors of flowers held different meanings. Different words were used to describe one's sexual preferences. In Elsa Gidlow's memoir, she discusses a doctor who had joined her secret group and brought in banned medical textbooks actually that discussed transgender identities. Really cool. A lot of them were burned. That was some of the first books burned during World War II by the Nazi regime, was books discussing being transgender. But the reason why it connects is because in it she actually mentions lavender, and this is how I found out about it, because her best friend Roswell, who had helped her found it, had a crush on the Doctor. And so in the book, she states, Roswell, her best friend, developed an unrequited love for the young Doctor, who did not walk the Lavender Path. Through the years, various secret codes such as Lavender Path developed as a safety precaution. Although some codes made their way into mainstream society, winding up as slang, queer people have always found ways to adapt, finding new ways to build connections despite the barriers they faced. Another branch of queer language actually comes from across the pond. So, Polari, or Polari, I'm not too sure how to pronounce it, R-W-E, was a British slang language, much like Cockney rhyming, that was used by pirates, thieves, queer people, and anyone else on the edge of society who needed a way to speak without incriminating themselves. Similar languages were carried throughout the years to avoid detection in public, such as the gender-subverting act of sheeing, which we kind of see now, but basically, pronouns were changed when discussing a love conquest in public or friends or anything of that nature. This has kind of developed into what we now see as slang such as like sis and mama, because if you were talking to someone you'd be like, oh yeah, my sis, she like bagged a bloke, or my mama was teaching my sis how to do makeup, right? Like, that's how it was kind of used in the past context, but now we have it as like, yes, mama, yes, queen, which is pretty cool. But queer languages aren't just unique to English-speaking countries either. Bahasa Gay was a popular speech style among gay Indonesians that was eventually integrated into everyday speech amongst the average Indonesian. There are just so many cracks and crannies of history unexplored that have flowed into modern-day life, unbeknownst to the average person. Queer history wasn't well explored until a grassroots movement by the queer community took up the mantle of asking the question, are we the first? The more we explore into these hidden pasts, the more we discover that not only was there a rich queer history in almost every aspect of life, every community, every culture, but that these pieces of the past that went undetected are still relevant in our society to this day. A little piece of history carries on in each of us, is what I like to think. But I think it's pretty cool that we still have these connections to the past. Also, quick plug, if you're interested in Canadian queer history, we do have an amazing course here at Queen's run by the Professor Dr. Stephen Maynard. I'm not sure if it's being run again this year or when it is being run, but much of the topics spoken about in this episode have been inspired by his really moving and exciting lectures, honestly. I'm not a history major, but very much enjoyed the class, so if you like this kind of stuff, definitely check it out. Now we get to move on to violets. So, violets are more well known as a queer flower, having originated from the famous lesbian poet Sappho. So, Sappho lived from 630 to 570 BC. I do not know how past time works, so seems like a good life though. 50 years for back then, pretty good. Funnily enough, the inhabitants of the Isles of Lesbos tried to sue for the right to the word lesbian and lost. So, pretty funny. But her romantic wording and moving poems made her synonymous with the female love for women, eventually resulting in the identity lesbian. I think it was, I've read some different things, but people would say you were like of a lesbian persuasion, and that's where you get like the term lesbianism. We don't like get gayanism, you know? So that's how you get those terms. And so like lesbian being associated with female love for women actually came before homosexuality or gay being associated with male love for men, or like just same-sex love in general. But yeah, so Sappho used violets to symbolize her affection for women, and often used the flower within her poetry, as well as the color purple. Thanks to her influence, sending a bouquet of violets, or wearing a violet on your lapel, became a way to signify sapphic love. Her use of the flower inspired many modern works of art, literature, and music, from the 1926 play La Prisonnière by Edouard Boudou, in which two lesbians are depicted sending and receiving a bouquet of violets to symbolize their love, to April's Fool, a rap song filled with imageries of flowers, specifically violets and roses, depicting an unconditional love written and sung by Angel Hayes, an agender pansexual rap artist. Side note, highly recommend checking her song out. It's really good. Despite many artists using violets in their work, Sappho's hold on the flower remains iconic. One of my favorite passages of hers reads, "Many crowns of violets, roses, and crocus, together you set up before more, and many scented wreaths made from blossoms around your soft throat. With pure, sweet oil you anointed me, and on a soft, gentle bed you quenched your desire. No holy sight we left uncovered, no grove." Sappho's work remains an everlasting representation of the lesbian experience, providing inspiration for queer women to this day. Some even credit the association of the color purple with the queer community, thanks to her repeated use of the color in her poems. Sadly, despite its significance, much of her work has been lost to degradation, improper preservation, and, worst of all, burning as a result of condemnation by the Catholic Church. Nonetheless, what's left of her work has impacted queer culture irrevocably. The legacy of Sappho is carried on in the continued association of violets with lesbian love and desire, and the lesbians and sapphics that make up a wonderful part of the queer community. Our third flower, green carnations, much like violets, were also a product of a prominent queer writer. A little more famous, so you might know him, Oscar Wilde used green carnations as a secret signal at the opening day of his play, Lady Windermere's Fan, in which he told a few friends to wear the flower on the lapel to signify their sexuality. From there, it remained a secret symbol of one's sexuality for years before falling into fashion. Oscar Wilde contributed much to queer culture with both his writing and social influence. Green carnations may have fallen out of fashion. I mean, I didn't even know about them until my research for this project. But their meaning and history still holds importance in the legacy of queer survival. Oscar Wilde was a prominent queer poet who was Lord Alfred Douglas's partner. Douglas actually wrote a really beautiful and moving poem about queer love using the beauty of nature for metaphor. Douglas actually wrote a poem using the beauty of nature to describe queer love named Two Lovers. I'm just going to read it out for you guys because it's truly such a beautiful, moving poem. "I dreamed I stood upon a little hill, and at my feet there lay a ground that seemed like a waste garden flowering at its will, with buds and blossoms. There were pools that dreamed, black unruffled. There were white lilies, a few, and crocus and violets, purple pale, snake-like fritillaries, scarce seen for the rank grass and through the green nest. Blue eyes of a shy perch winked in the sun. And there were curious flowers before unknown, flowers that were stained with moonlight or with shades of nature's willful moods. And here a one that had drunk in the transitory tone of one brief moment in a sunset, blades of grass that hung in 100 springs that had been slowly but exquisitely nurtured by the stars, and watered with the scented dew, long-cupped lilies, that for rays of sun had seen only God's glory, for never a sunrise mars the luminous air of heaven. Beyond, abrupt, a grey stone wall, o'ergrown with velvet moss, uprose, and gazing eyes stood long, all mazed, to see a place so strange, so sweet, so fair. And as I stood and marveled, lo, across the garden came a youth. One hand he raised to shield from the sun. His wind-tossed hair was twined with flowers, and in his hands he bore a purple bunch of bursting grapes. His eyes were clear as crystal, naked all was he, white as the snow on the pathless mountain's floor. Red were his lips as red wine spilleth that dyes a marble floor. His brow cladony, and he came near me, with his lips uncurled and kind, and caught my hand and kissed my mouth, and gave me grapes to eat, and said, Sweet friend, come, I will show thee shadows of the world, and images of life. See, from the south comes the pale pageant that hath never an end. And lo, with the garden of my dream, I saw two walking on a shining plain of golden light. The one did joyous seem, and fair and blooming, and a sweet refrain came from his lips. He sang of pretty maids and joyous love of comely girl and boy. His eyes were bright mid the dancing blades of golden grass his feet did trip for joy. And in his hand he held an ivory lute, with strings of gold that were as maiden's hair, and sang with a voice as tuneful as a flute. And round his neck 3 chains of roses were. But he that his comrade walked aside, he was full of sad and sweet, and his large eyes were strange with wondrous brightness, staring wide. With gazing he sighed with many sighs that moved me, and his cheeks were wan and white, like pallid lilies, and his lips were red, like poppies. In his hands he clenched tight, and yet again unclenched. And his head was wreathed with moonflowers pale as lips of death. Purple robe he wore, all wrought in gold, with the device of a great snake whose breath was a fiery flame, which when I did behold, I fell a-weeping, and I cried, Sweet youth, tell me why, sad and sighing, thou dost rove these pleasant realms. I pray thee, speak me sooth, what is thy name? He said, My name is Love. Then straight the first did tell himself to me, and cried, He lieth, for his name is Shame, but I am Love. And I was wont be alone in this fair garden till he came. Unasked by night, I am true love. I fill the hearts of boy and girl with mutual flame. Then sighing, said the other, Have thy will. I am the love that dare not speak its name. Pretty cool, right? I really love that poem. It speaks perfectly to the queer experience of being forced to live in shame, even though you're just as natural, as beautiful, as plentiful as the other love, the love that dare not speak its name. No lesser than the love that shouts it aloud. It's really a really gorgeous metaphor. And looking back on art, whether it be Sappho's poems or just art in general, or this poem, I really enjoy the connection through the past, especially through art and creativity, that we found ways to express ourselves, we found ways to connect with each other, and there's that legacy of connection and survival that we've passed from generation to generation, especially through the arts. Whether it be theater, painting, poems, writing, secret journals, secret letters, a song played on the main stage of a grand stadium. Queer love and queer survival is just so cool. So with that, we'll get into our next flower. So pansies are not associated with any one person, but rather their association with the queer community was born out of the slang terms for flamboyant gay men at the time. Words such as buttercup, daisy, and of course pansy were terms used for gay or effeminate men. In the 1920s and 30s, there was also a thing called pansy craze in America. Drag queens and other flamboyant people performed all over America, concentrating in Harlem and New York City. The Prohibition managed to bring people together, as the scarcity of alcohol brought people of all sorts together in the speakeasies that illegally served booze. Suddenly, the pansies were entertainment for all, not just a niche underground queer subculture. Balls, parties, performances, and beauty contests became a regular form of entertainment for the average Joe. And while some were obviously not supportive of the flamboyant shenanigans, queer presences were no longer unusual at a bar. Not only female impersonators graced the stage. In Harlem, where the pansy craze was taking off, there was also a prominent performer, Gladys Bentley, who bent gender in her own way, sporting a sharp white tuxedo and sharper lyrics as she performed classic songs with her own twists. Of course, the pansy craze sadly didn't last long, fizzling out as Prohibition ended, and most of the performers were banned from the establishments they once frequented for fear that their licenses, their newly acquired liquor licenses, would be revoked if they were around full of certain characters. Some places managed to hold on to the craze, however, with cities like San Francisco carrying on the performances for decades. Although the flower itself didn't have much of a hand in its connection to queer history, the pansy remains a prominent symbol of gender expression and femininity to this day. Finally, our last flower, probably the most classic flower, is a red rose. The red rose has been a symbol for romantic love in both straight and queer communities. However, the classic romantic origins do not exclude it from being significant in the queer community as well. Being a love-centered flower, the rose has been symbolic of queer love in many works of literature, music, and art. We've seen so many examples just in the past little bit I've talked about this, such as the excerpt in Sappho. The crown was made from violets, crocus, and roses. And additionally, the poem by Lord Alfred Douglas discussed the string of 3 roses around love's neck. Queering the rose recontextualizes romantic love as more than just the typical straight couple, instead broadens the concept of romance to encompass all forms of love. So I like to think in painting roses in this context and kind of queering romance. I love it. But yeah, and there's tons of other things that can be so-called queered just through, being queer and living them. Being queer and living as yourself, Whenever you step through a door, that threshold that hasn't been stepped through before, you start to broaden the spectrum of existence, Not everything is just what we come to know through years of socialization, but anyone can be anything, anyone can do anything, and you're not limited by your sexuality. In fact, you're emboldened by it, you're empowered by it. So now that we've discussed the flowers individually, I think talking about our theme of connection and resilience just by itself would be a nice change of pace. We humans thrive on connection. Whether someone has the same hair color as you or likes the same music as you, we categorize ourselves into groups, us versus them, insiders and outsiders. It's an evolutionary instinct, one that has helped us survive for generations. But being an outsider can be deadly. The need for queer connection is as inherent as the need to breathe. The methods of communication, of connection, were all created out of a will to survive, to thrive as one exists whole. Without the clever adaptations made by our queer predecessors that allowed them to organize and eventually make space for our community, we would be left an outsider, wondering if there's anyone else who could possibly be like us. Just like flowers, we made our roots underground so that we could have the chance to blossom in the sun. See there? See what I did there? Brought it back to nature. Being visibly queer honors those who had to hide in the shadows to survive. Every queer person who decides to live as they truly are, without regard to others' opinions, carries on this legacy of survival. Resilience is a key pillar throughout the queer community, and it's made possible by the connections we create. I heard something the other day that struck me as the perfect metaphor for what I've been trying to talk about. So it's actually a pretty cool fact, but the largest organism on Earth is a web of fungi underground that is expanded into one large mass, supporting one another to keep it healthy and strong. Thanks to the strong underground connection of the fungi, it has been able to spread its root and thrive in its environment, spanning thousands of acres. We see this property in some species of trees as well. I think it's aspen trees or ash trees. I'm not a biologist. That's my sister. But they connect underground through the root system to help one another and survive by distributing water and nutrients to any tree in need. And that's kind of what queer people do, what we have done. We've survived through hundreds of years and worked hard at protecting one another to make sure we were strong enough to survive above the surface. So as you paint your flowers, or whatever you decided to paint, remember that the work that was and is being done under the surface is so that we can celebrate in the spotlight. And we kind of have to give thanks to the people who have come before us and the people who are working now to create safe, happy, and healthy environments for us to just be who we are. Pretty amazing feat how far we've come. And in the midst of everything that's going on, always, it's nice to think back to that and know, no matter what's going on, we gotta look at how far we've come. We gotta look at who's done what. We gotta honor those who have fought for us. We've gotta fight for us. And just gotta spread our roots. Take care of one another. Thank you for painting along with me today. As we finish up, I just want to invite you to check out our Instagram at QueensU Yell House to keep up to date with our latest events, and to return your art kit if you have borrowed one as soon as you're able to, so that we can put it back up for loan. Probably say all this again, but I did just want to thank you for joining me in celebrating the joy of diversity.
So now that everything's painted, we have to let it dry really well. I'd say honestly wait 10, maybe 15 minutes after you finish painting to let everything perfectly dry. Because then what we're going to do is we're going to take the pen and we're going to draw on top to add more detail. So, and we also have to erase like the little bits of pencil that are still there. So once you've finished your painting, let it dry, set a timer, go grab a cup of tea, relax for a little bit, and then come back to it, and we'll finish it up together. Alright, see you in 10 minutes. So now that your painting's completely dry, like you can put your hand over it and everything, you're going to take the kneaded eraser and lightly erase anywhere where you still see little bits of pencil. This is an important step because once you put the line art on, you really want to be done. Okay, now that that's done, we should have no little bits of lines or anything like that. And to finish off the painting, I like to take a marker and just outline and add some little detail that would be harder to add with the actual watercolor. So I'm going to add that, and then we'll finish up. now that you've got your liner all done, one of the last steps is just to put a little signature on it. Ta-da! Okay. So now that your painting's complete, and you want to make sure it's completely dry, you can begin to peel the tape off. So make sure you peel slowly, and I like to peel on like a 45-degree angle, just to make sure it doesn't rip. As you can see, we're left with nice crisp lines. Amazing. Thank you so much for painting with me today. Make sure to return your art kit to the Yell House whenever you have the chance, and I hope to see you in our next video. Have a great day.